Hello everyone. Welcome to MSL Learn's training module on designing safer streets. My name is Rohit Tak. I'm an urban designer working with WRI India. This module is in continuation with the last two modules that you have attended. In our previous modules, we learned about how in the last 20 years, we have built several large-scale infrastructure projects like the ceilings, the freeways, the highways, to move vehicles in large numbers and with faster speeds. And while we did that, we also widened our roads with an urgency. The road widening was mainly to improve the carriageway capacity and vehicle efficiency. But in reality, while widening the roads, by not considering more than 50% of the road's users and the users, we affected not just the road's carriage capacity, but also road safety. To introduce this road safety in our streets in Mumbai, in this module, we are going to understand the process of designing safer streets for all street users. We will understand this process with the case study of Belassis Road Redesign project. But before we do that, let's first understand what exactly is a street. Because in the context like Mumbai, streets are much more than just as a conduit for traffic. Streets are multifaceted public spaces where people's lives fold and unfold. And this is true. We celebrate a lot of our festivals on the streets, a lot of socio-cultural activities happen on the streets, and we use our street as a space which is more like a public space. Streets comprise of more than 70% of the city's open spaces. A lot of times we play badminton, cricket, a lot of games, sports on the streets. And we use our streets as an urban open space. Streets have potential to serve as a front yard for residents living along it. Like seen in these images, a lot of residents who live along the streets which have goods footpaths, they use them as their extended front yards. It also adds on to the neighborhood building. Streets foster business activities, offer livelihood to communities, and are foundation for our urban informal economy, which is very true in the context of Mumbai. The urban informal economy in Mumbai makes it very unique in terms of the street's character. And lastly, while offering this, streets also provide a mode of commute for all street users. But this video of the hill road, which I'm going to show you now, is our reality, which is contrasting to the idea of street which we just discussed. That was pretty intense. The honking, the congestion, the traffic, people running to cross the street, not having enough pedestrian infrastructure. This is how it feels like if you walk on Hill Road or any arterial streets at peak hour in our city, where due to the sheer pressure of increasing number of cars, the road is widened to the maximum extent, leaving very little or no pedestrian infrastructure for walking. Situations like this are affecting the road safety scenario in Mumbai. And the result is around 52% of the total traffic fatalities in Mumbai are the pedestrians and the cyclists. This is the paradigm shift about which we spoke in our last video. In our cities, we need to shift our focus from moving cars to moving people. I will go a step ahead and say that we need to shift our focus from building roads for cars to building streets for people. So who are these people for whom we need to design our streets? The answer is the vulnerable street users. Vulnerable street users are the users who do not have any kind of protective cover or shell around them. Due to the lack of protective cover and lack of space for walking, these vulnerable users are directly exposed to the speeding vehicles on the streets and are most affected in the road crashes. These users include the pedestrians, the cyclists, the physically challenged people, the elderly, and the children. So while designing our streets, we need to put these vulnerable street users first and design our streets. Because as observed in this image, for simply walking on the streets, these vulnerable users have to fight for space with the cars. So if we design our streets for them to walk and then for the cars to commute, then we can automatically add on to the carriage capacity of the street, and we don't need to widen our streets. Now that we are clear that we need to design our streets to be safer for the vulnerable street users, in this part of the module, we will understand the process of designing streets by putting these users first. There are various ways a street could be designed, but this process lists down the 3 main stages which we learned while designing streets in Mumbai. This process includes the first stage, that is, of baseline data collection, followed by introducing street design principles, followed by introducing street design elements. To help you understand this process better, I'm going to use the case study of Belassis Road Redesign project, which MCGM's road department is currently implementing in the Vehicular neighborhood. Belassis Road is a major east-west connector in the Vehicular area of Mumbai. It starts from Nagpada Junction on one side and has Mumbai Central Junction on the other side. The length of Belassis Road is around 830 meters. And its right-of-way varies from 21 meters to 27 meters. In terms of the land use, this street has a lot of mixed land use on both the sides. It has institutional buildings, it has commercial complexes, it has malls, it has residential buildings, and it has retail frontages across the stretch of the road. On this road, we can notice a heavy movement of pedestrians as well as vehicles throughout the day. And in the night, during the non-peak hours as well, one can see the edges of the streets being very active with the pedestrian and pedestrian-related activities. Now we will understand the first stage of street design, that is, the collection of baseline data stage. This stage involves 4 main steps. First is creating a total station survey drawing. Second is creating an inventory of the users along the street. Third is of vehicular and pedestrian volume study. And fourth is of road space safety inspection. Now we will understand what all involves in these stages and what is the significance of this stage while redesigning this Belassis road. The first step is of total station survey. Total station surveys offers a comprehensive understanding of all stationary parameters on the streets, which include the chainage, the center line, the widths of the travel lanes, the widths of the footpath, the drainage, the utilities, the trees, signage, signals, etc. An understanding of all these stationary parameters was very helpful when we were designing Belassis Road, because we were working with all these existing conditions. The second step is of vehicular and pedestrian volume study. This study offers a good understanding of peak hour vehicular and pedestrian volume. These volumes are important while designing the cross-section of the street. In the context of Belassis Road, along with the volumes, this study also helped us understand the locations which were frequently used by the pedestrians to cross the street and understand the demand of crossing at these locations. The third step is of creating inventory of users and uses of the street. Now there are 2 types of inventories. One inventory is of stationary users and one is of non-stationary users. The inventory of non-stationary users includes mapping of vending, hawking, loading and unloading activities, taxi stands, parking, etc. This helps us understand how the side strip of the road is being used throughout the day at a very dynamic kind of level. The inventory of stationary users allows us to understand the character of the street, and it also helps us identify the locations which need specific design interventions. For example, bus stops or some fixed vending stalls. So how to incorporate them in the designing of the street is something which we can think about when we map all these uses. In the case of Belassis Road, it also helped us to map the things which were missing on the total station survey. For example, the entries and exits of a lot of buildings were missing on the total station survey. So while we conducted this inventory mapping, we mapped all these entries and exits. The fourth step is of road safety inspection and issues identification. The road safety inspection is a method used to identify specific issues which affect the safety of road users. These are some of the identified issues on Belassis roads. The road had lack of continuity of footpath and lack of pedestrian ramps at certain locations. It had haphazard placement of bus stops and utilities which reduced the walkable space on the footpath. It had two-wheelers parked sporadically across the length on the footpaths, which again reduced the walkability. It also had unsafe pedestrian infrastructure in front of the schools, which exposed school children to the speeding vehicles. And lastly, it had number of intersections, but they were large and unsafe to cross by foot. So just to revise these steps, so in the baseline data collection, first thing we do is we carry out a total station survey. We carry out inventory of uses and users, which are stationary and non-stationary. We carry out a detailed vehicle and pedestrian volume study, and we carry out the road safety inspection. After studying this baseline data, the first thing we did in the case of Belassis Road was to form a vision for the transformation of the street. And the vision was pedestrian safety first, while maintaining the character of the street and improving carriageway capacity. This vision included 6 main objectives. The first objective was to channelize traffic lanes and pedestrian movements through design. The second objective was to absorb unidentified or residual areas into multi-utility zone. The third objective was to orient traffic lanes correctly. The fourth objective was to maintain the lane balance. The fifth objective was to prevent unpermitted movement through design. And the sixth objective was to provide clear and adequate pedestrian infrastructure, including crossings, waiting areas, and pedestrian ramps, etc. So in the first stage, we studied the baseline data, we decided the vision, and now in the second stage, we need to apply a few street design principles to transform this vision of the street onto ground. The first street design principle is of deciding street design framework, where we are going to talk about how to decide the cross-section of the street. The second principle is to carry out geometric corrections at the plan level. The third principle is to introduce speed calming measures. The fourth principle is to introduce road markings and the signage. And the fifth principle is to introduce placemaking and urban design. Placemaking means designing areas along the footpath as a public space to enhance user experience. For example, if we are designing a footpath, we are making entire street a pretty walkable one, we also need to make sure that we provide some kind of pockets where people can sit and enjoy the street. So that's something which is called as placemaking. The first principle, that is the street design framework principle, it includes redesign of the street section considering the traffic volumes, pedestrian volumes, and ancillary activities on the street. Now, in the case of Belassis Road, we decided to retain the existing median because it was pretty well aligned and there was no need to change the center line of the street. So we were working with this center line. And the idea was to propose a contiguous carriageway on both the sides of the street. By contiguous, I mean the width of the carriageway is uniform on both the sides. There are 2 plus points of providing uniform width of the carriageway across the length of the street. The first is that it doesn't invite any kind of bottleneck or congestion. And second, it smoothens the traffic flow. And lastly, we added the unused spaces of this on the street to form a multi-utility zone, which can accommodate the ancillary functions which take place on the street side, which otherwise were obstructing the vehicular movement. So now the street section is pretty organized. This is how the existing Belassis roads section looked like. And this can be any road section in our city. The yellow cars you see here are the parked vehicles. Now they are parked on the carriageway. So basically they are reducing the carriage capacity, but that is also a function which is required on the roadside, because the entire street is a retail street, and parking or pick and drop, these kind of activities do happen on retail streets. So how to accommodate their needs is something which we try to understand while studying this section. And after that, and after studying the volume of the vehicles, we decided to introduce 7.5 meters on both the sides of vehicular traffic lanes. After that, we introduced 2.5 meters of multi-utility zone. Now this multi-utility zone is something of which character changes across the stretch of the road. And after that, we made sure that we have at least 3.5 meters of the footpath for unobstructed walking. And this is also in line with BMC's Pedestrian First Footpath Policy Circular, which says that there has to be minimum between 1.8 to 3 meters of width of the footpath on the streets. The second principle was to transform this section into the plan by correcting this geometry at the plan level. So this is how the existing plan of the street looked like. This is the center line of the street. These are the 7.5 meters of the contiguous carriageways on both the sides. Followed by that are the continuous and contiguous universally accessible footpaths. And between the footpath and the travel lanes are the multi-utility zones. After that, as we had also observed the areas which are frequently used by pedestrians to cross, we kind of introduced safer protected pedestrian crossings at these locations. And this is how it looked like. The third principle is of introducing speed control or speed calming measures. In this step, in order to control the speeding at strategic locations on the street, we introduce speed calming measures such as tabletop crossings or speed breakers or rumble strips. In the case of Belassis Road, we introduced speed breakers at the unsignalized locations to make sure that the turning vehicles are turning at a slower speed and also able to see the vehicles which are coming from the internal lane onto the Belassis Road. These speed breakers also make sure that vehicles slow down when pedestrians are crossing at the intersections. The fourth principle was of introducing road marking and the signage. Road markings and the signage provides a guidance and the information to drivers as well as pedestrians. Road surface marking can also indicate regulation for parking and stopping. Same is the use of signage. Road marking is at the surface level, signage are at the elevation level. And the last principle was introducing placemaking and urban design. So at the strategic locations where we thought that we need to do some kind of design interventions along the street, we introduced placemaking and urban design. Near the bus stops, near the malls, which has a lot of pedestrian footfall. Also at the areas where it's possible to provide street furniture, it was provided. And lastly at the junctions also. Just to revise these street design principles. So first thing we do is we decide the street design framework. That is, we decide the cross section of the street. Then we correct the geometry of the street at the plan level. Then we introduce speed control and speed calming measures. Then we introduce road marking and the signage. And lastly, we introduce placemaking and urban design. Okay, so now after studying the baseline data, after forming the vision for the street, after introducing principle to transform that vision, now the third stage is to introduce street design elements. Now in the case of Belassis Road, we introduced three main street design elements. The first is curb extension, second is median refuge island, and third is multi-utility zone. So basically, when you're talking about street design elements, the list could be exhaustive. But for the sake of this module and the presentation, I'm focusing on these three elements because these need to be repeated all along the streets in Mumbai, because these have a lot of impact on pedestrians as well as vehicular safety. So let's talk about the curb extension first. Curb extension is a footpath extension at the strategic location to reduce pedestrian crossing distance and control pedestrians' exposure to vehicles. On Belassis Road, at locations where street side parking tends to obstruct the pedestrian crossing, curb extensions are introduced by simply relocating one car with paved footpath. The study shows that providing 2 meters of curb extensions at crossings can reduce crash occurrence, which involves pedestrians, by 12%. The second the element is the median refuge island. Median refuge island is defined as the paved portion in the median of the street where pedestrians can stop and wait while crossing. In the case of Belassis Road, median refuge islands were used where pedestrians need to have a safer harbor on the median after crossing one direction of the street and before crossing the next. The data suggests that providing median refuge islands at pedestrian crossings can reduce pedestrian crashes by 32%, which is a huge number. So this has a very good impact on the pedestrian safety, as well as people while crossing will have some space to stand and will not hinder with the moving vehicles. So this element can also be replicated anywhere on the streets in Mumbai. And the last element which I want to talk about is the multi-utility zone. Multi-utility zones are the areas which are allocated for street side activities such as vending, bus bays, parking, and drop-off and pick-up areas, and also to accommodate other utilities necessary for smoother functioning of the street. In the case of Belassis Road, considering the vibrant nature of the street, an organized space for the street side activities can help to smoothen the pedestrian and vehicular movement. So this has a very, very good kind of multiplicity and which needs to be explored throughout our streets in Mumbai. So this is the proposed view of the Belassis Road. After introducing the street design principles and elements, this is how the vision for Belassis Road looks like. It has uniform carriageway. It has organized multi-utility zone for all the activities which happen along the street's edges. It has shorter pedestrian crossings. It has wider sidewalks. It has median refuge islands. It has bulb outs. And it has placemaking opportunities to create some kind of image of the street. This is the ongoing progress of Belassis Road. This is how the street was before. This is how narrow the sidewalk or the footpath was before. And while the interventions are ongoing, the implementations are ongoing, the roads department is making sure that the geometries is implemented as per the design proposal and the footpath is widened. And this is how the street is now going to look like. To conclude, I would say, as engineers and street designers, it's our responsibility to design streets to be safer for all street users by putting vulnerable street users first. Mumbai has around 2,000 kilometers of street network, and every year we improve 100 to 150 kilometers of streets in Mumbai. If they improved for pedestrians, there is a positive impact on carrying capacity of the streets as well as safety of all street users. And finally, because streets in Mumbai are not just conduit for traffic, and as we already discussed, and I would like to mention these points, that streets are also open spaces, streets are for placemaking, streets are like a front yard, streets are like they generate the economy, and lastly, they are the mode for commute of all street users. That brings us to the end of today's module. In case if you want to answer the quiz and receive a certificate, you may do so by clicking the link that you have received in your messages. And also feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or queries regarding today's module. Our next module is going to be about designing safer intersections. So please stay tuned for that. Thank you.